Hi, welcome to a bit beyond the basics of immigration, marriage fraud deterrents. If you haven't watched it, I recommend that you watch the immigration visa video from the Basics of Immigration series. It will be helpful to understand what we're talking about today. But if you haven't, no problem, we'll get at least a short review of it right now. All right, if you remember from immigrant visas, if they're family-based, we have a variety of family relationships that make someone eligible to petition to bring a family member. Parents can bring their children. Spouses can bring their spouse. Children can bring their parents. US citizens can bring their brothers and sisters. So we have this circle of family members. In fact, I'm going to put it up here just because it will be helpful to look at. Okay, so again, to recap, now that I've drawn the picture, we have a US citizen, or in some cases an LPR, and LPR can't do all of these, but some of them. They can bring their parent, their spouse, their child, or their sibling, their brother or sister. And this child can involve a variety of little children, big children, etc. We've talked more about that in other videos. We'll talk about it in future ones as well. But today what I want to focus on right here is this marriage relationship. These family relationships pretty much are or they are not. You are your parents' child. These are your siblings. This is your child. There are a few exceptions with adoption, and there are provisions in immigration law to look at adoption and to prevent adoption fraud. But for the most part, these relationships, they just are or they aren't in existence. Of course, people could commit fraud to try to show them, but for the most part, these things are pretty easy to just show. They are. Marriage is different. Anybody pretty much can marry somebody else. So if I want to come to the United States, I really, really want to come to the United States, and I want to live there forever, I want to be an immigrant. I can't just make myself someone's parent. I can't make myself someone's child. I can't make myself someone's sibling, but I sure can make myself someone's spouse. So we have a weak spot here where people go and they marry US citizens or LPRs with the purpose of coming to the United States. That is their only purpose. So let me stop for a minute and say, it's okay if that's part of your purpose. If you love your husband and you want to go live in the United States with him, that's fine. That's totally normal. But you can't marry him only because you want to go live in the United States. You actually don't care about him at all. You don't have what in immigration law is called a bona fide marriage or a good faith marriage. Now, I have a little heart here, but I will also say you don't have to love the person. There are valid marriages that aren't based on love. They may be arranged marriages or a variety of other things. So that's one of the hard things about figuring out. You can figure out if a marriage is legal. It either is legal or it's not legal. But is it a real marriage is tricky because there are all kinds of different marriages. We've all known people who are married to people that they don't always like or they don't always love. We know people with age differences, language barriers, a variety of other things. What looks like a good marriage to me doesn't necessarily look like a good marriage to other people, and vice versa. So this is a really tricky thing to figure out. Is this an actual valid marriage that had purposes that weren't just to get into the United States? Okay, so kind of throughout the history, but especially in the 1990s, Congress said we really need to fix some of the issues here. And so they created a few different things. And don't quote me on the dates because they've been added at different times, but I want to talk about just a couple of the things to deter marriage fraud. There are criminal penalties, both for the US citizen if they help with the fraud and for the alien. So criminal penalties are in place. There was a section added to the immigration law that basically says this. If you enter into a marriage to attempt to gain an immigration benefit, the sole purpose of that, you are barred from ever getting any other kind of immigrant benefit. So the way that we see this work in real life is sometimes people get married for immigration purposes, and it's not a real marriage, so eventually they get divorced. And then they meet the love of their life and they marry their real spouse, and their real spouse files a petition for them. And they would be eligible as the spouse of a United States citizen or an LPR, except 204C says, you formerly sought an immigration benefit based off of marriage fraud, so now you can't have this visa. We also have people who later their company files a petition for them, and the same thing. You may be a valid employee of this company, but you can't get an immigrant visa, even an employment-based one, because previously you committed marriage fraud to get an immigration benefit. So this is a really strict law when we can find proof of prior immigration fraud. There's also something that happens, I'm trying to think how to put this up here. I'll put it up as CPR status. So if you remember, usually when someone gets an immigrant visa and they come to the United States or they adjust their status in the United States, they become an LPR, a lawful permanent resident. Well, this gets a little complicated, so stick with me here. If they are coming as the spouse of a U.S. citizen and they have been married for less than 2 years, fewer than 2 years, they can come into the country, but instead of being an LPR, they're going to be what's called a conditional permanent resident. At the end of 2 more years, they have to file paperwork to show that they have a bona fide marriage. It's a real marriage, and at that point, then their conditions are removed and they become an actual LPR. So there are 2 different 2-year requirements. If they've been married less than 2 years, they get CPR status, and then they have to wait 2 more years after that to remove their conditions. So it could potentially be a long time. Of course, if you get married today and file the paperwork tomorrow, then total it's going to be about 2 years anyway. There might be some other things. In general, immigration officers are going to be looking to see, does this look like a valid marriage before granting any kind of visa or permanent residency based on a marriage relationship. But these are some of the specific deterrents that Congress has put in place to try to focus on that and prevent marriage fraud from happening. If you have any questions, let me know. I just wanted you to be aware of some of these because they come up fairly often in conversations.